This is one of the things that's most exciting to me is on the school creation side and the innovation side, seeing things start to emerge that are built very specifically for the market constraints of most families having access to ESA money. And so they can make choices within the confines of how much that cost or how much money they have access to and how they're allowed to use it. And I think that we're in the very early stages of seeing programs starting to emerge that are catering towards that. I'm very excited to see what happens on this front. It sounds to me like you're almost describing a deschooling process that families have to go through, where they're just expecting a sort of one-to-one replacement for
Mhm.
public school. And they're looking for something that's better, but they're looking for one thing to
Yes.
replace the one thing that they had before. And then they start realizing that actually there's tons of room to play, and school isn't a binary. You either are in one school or you're not in school at all. And then they start playing with customizing options. This is very interesting to me. I feel like there's sort of this disassociation or like detachment from public school that's happening not just logistically but psychologically too.
I think that's right. I think there's a couple of reasons for that. I mean, one is that the vast majority of students today and the vast majority of their parents did go through the K-12 schooling system, primarily public schools, where you enter, you go to your local school, right? There wasn't much choice for parents like myself who were going around in terms of charter or private school options that were publicly funded, et cetera. So this is kind of a new way of thinking about it. I think the second way is also school choice programs are misunderstood. And when ESAs are passed, they're often painted by opponents as, oh, this is vouchers, this is defunding schools, neither of which are true. But I think that that message does get repeated of like, oh, it's a voucher. I can take this and I can spend it at tuition. And I think that's kind of maybe most people's base level understanding until they actually participate in the program. Um, and then I think the third one is it really is just a sea change because look, we use the term empowering a lot, and I think we use that maybe so much that it doesn't mean anything. But when you step back and you think about kind of the history of education in the US, right, for 100 years, we've had a very certain type of schooling model, handles vast majority of students. It's the public school system, primarily supported by local and state taxes, and a little bit of federal money. And now we're kind of moving towards one in which it is everyone has, the same lesson in the first grade in Manhattan, across the 5 boroughs, no matter what. And now we're kind of moving towards a system where, oh, it's actually more decentralized than that, right? We're actually allowing parents to have funding from the state, and then those parents actually get to decide what's best for it. So I think it's actually a really exciting movement because in many ways it is just a complete sea change in how we fund education, in how we allow parents and families to navigate it. And so I think that it's been incredible what's happened over the last 4 years since COVID, but I think the next 5 to 10 will have even more change as these programs launch, get off the ground, as parents get comfortable with them, as schools start to respond to the ESA demand. And so just incredibly excited to see how that works out.
Do you have any predictions of things that places you see big gaps in the market and you expect something to fill it, or things that you think will become more commonplace, or is it too early to hypothesize?
So I think that increasingly every state will have some version of education savings accounts. What it looks like in, say, Louisiana versus Iowa versus California will be very different. But I think one of the most kind of heartening things is, we did a poll last year with John Zogby and Zogby Associates. They're kind of prominent presidential pollers. And one of the really cool things that came out of it were just as many people in California support ESAs as Alabama, right? And so I think that we think about this as a very partisan issue, but at the end of the day, parents don't think about it as a partisan issue. That's mainly down to kind of politics and how the political parties align on school choice, and political leadership. But I think over time, parents will win out. I think that's what we've seen over the last 4 years, right? During COVID, parents were forced, in many cases, to go into alternative education, and the system of parents actually responded remarkably well, right? Parents set up learning pods, and there were micro schools, and people did outdoor schools, and they set up, homeschooling co-ops, right? And I think what you're beginning to see is that policy is actually catching up to a lot of those changes that happened over the last 4 years, which is why we're now passing ESAs, we're now standing them up to actually support the education freedom that many families experience for the first time over the last 4 years, right? And they want more of that, and they're willing to vote in a certain way to get more of that, and they're willing to support parties and politicians on either side who give them that. And so I think we are really just at the beginning of this. So I think existing ESA programs continue to get larger. I think you see more and more providers enter the space who are offering differentiated offerings. So I think the idea of, you know, full-time enrollment at public or private school will increasingly be just one option of many. I think you'll see private schools begin to offer more part-time classes, offer more specialized classes. I think you will see rises in things that we as a country have always said we care a lot about, like career and technical education. I think you'll see more providers enter into that space. I think you'll see more parents using funding for that. And so overall, I think that one of the most exciting things about ESAs, besides empowering parents, is kind of the second order effects. If we take this funding that previously was only going to one type of schooling and parents didn't have any control over it, and we give it to parents, what are the second order effects of that? I think we're beginning to see that, right? We're beginning to see a system that's more responsive, that has more diverse choices, right? There will be more Montessori schools. There will be more religious schools. There will be more Reggio Emilia schools. People will be creating new schools, right? The idea that we can only have Maria Montessori's vision of education, which is 100 years ago, doesn't mean that someone else can come up with a whole new curriculum or pedagogy and then kind of create a network around that. So I think I'm really excited just about how much choice is going to affect education. And I think we're already beginning to kind of see that.